Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcasts with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast. My guest is Susan Choe. She's a managing partner at Catalyst Ventures. And Catalyst is spelled with a K, so if you're going to go to the website, it's www.catalyst.ventures. So Susan, thanks for coming. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Yeah, my voice actually is a little off, which for podcasting isn't great, but you'll be giving all the juicy info, so that's okay.
Yeah. Well, it sounds husky and nice, so I think it sounds good.
No, thank you. So tell me, tell listeners a little bit about yourself and then about Catalyst Ventures and what you guys do there.
Sure. We're a early stage AI fund, so we mostly focus on companies that are data driven. And the reason for that is back in 2013, when I first formed a different fund, which was also data driven. The background of all of these funds is that I've been either operating, investing in, or founding startups or big company groups that are all data-driven technology companies. And for the most part, I think when you leverage or map, repetitive activities that human beings do, then via algorithms and AI, you can actually free up a lot of time for creative stuff. And so that's sort of the overarching theme and reason why we focus on AI and early stage, because we can discover and help a lot of talent with capital and other resources that we have.
Okay. So when you say early stage AI, how early stage are you going to be the first one that's a funding partner? Or do you wait until they've gotten some funding, seed money? I mean, where do you come in at?
Yeah, usually they've had a bit of a prototype and maybe one or two commercial partners who are actually piloting or testing out the technology is the ideal point. As you know, and probably see, a lot of data-driven companies, and ultimately for the algorithms to really be able to reflect what they can do, you need some kind of a commercial partner to actually test it out. And since we focus on enterprise SaaS models, that's another reason why we like to see at least one commercial partner who's engaged.
You said that kind of quickly. You focus on what kind of SaaS models? Can you explain a little bit more about that?
All right, enterprise SaaS, so software as a service.
Okay. So what's an example of some of the companies that you've either funded, or if you can't say, what's an ideal AI company or venture that you would look at? What would they do,
Sure.
for instance, that you would want to invest in?
Yeah, basically, I think it's really the access to the relevant data that the AI companies can train their algorithm on is why I like to see companies that have at least a commercial partner or two. And, as you know, I think AI algorithms are much like how we learn as human beings, and for us to learn, we also need data, right? So something as simple as, hey, what kind of people do we like to work with, to even what kind of investment should we do to, hey, what are some of the healthcare type of signals that our bodies are giving? So for that point, we invest into financial services technology companies that really focus on streamlining the research process. So using natural language processing of unstructured data, which is all just another way to say you and I or a research analyst may have to read hundreds of articles a day across hundreds of sources, but a natural language processing software can actually go through a lot of that kind of text and visual research sources and distill it down into certain signals that a human being can look at. And so a a financial analyst can now look at the actual distilled info and really think about how they may want to strategize on investment and whatnot, and portfolio management in essence. Another way that one of our companies does this is DocMatter, which is a closed community of doctors that are usually world-class leaders of knowledge owners across about now over 400 medical disciplines across 100 countries. And what they're doing is facilitating knowledge sharing, sort of like a virtual college of medicine. And so rather than having a handful of residents be able to learn from world-class leading medical practitioners, this kind of a closed-loop community that numbers in, there'll be close to 100,000 by year end or early next year. They are able to not only learn near real time based on real cases of patients on how to use medical devices or pharmaceutical protocols, but also based on AI, the platform is able to provide solutions or potential answers and experts that you should ping on the network. So that's a knowledge sharing community that also has an enterprise SaaS model where the pharmaceutical companies are currently sponsoring doctors to access this knowledge community. Why would they do that? Because it's a trusted source of a peer-to-peer sharing network about medical devices, pharmaceutical protocols based on actual application, right? And the prior example of a fintech company, they're actually using environmental, social, governmental news as a new source of information to not only give an edge to portfolio managers, but frankly hold S&P 500, Russell 2000, NASDAQ companies accountable because actual portfolio managers' strategy of holding, buying, selling their stock is going to be influenced by these research reports or signals, as we call them. And why is that? If you think about it, Bloomberg Terminal, S&P 500, Fitch, all of these guys have been mining all the known sources of financial signals out there for decades. But this is a new kind of a signal where, environmental news about, let's say, just as a faux example, let's say Procter & Gamble might have been found to be dumping some kind of chemical somewhere in the Minnesota rivers, and nobody else picked it up other than Minnesota Star. Well, a typical equity analyst may not be reading Minnesota Star, but this NLP approach to crawling all kinds of hundreds of thousands of sources of news on a daily basis will pick it up. And not only that, it'll auto-categorize whether if this information is important to the underlying equity and pretty soon the bonds or the corporate bonds of a P&G, and be able to give a signal as to whether the stock traditionally has moved or not on news like this. And so in a recent Harvard study in October, basically confirmed that stock managers, or rather portfolio managers of huge assets, are finding alpha of, somewhere in the range of 4 to 5% additional to what a MSCI index is currently doing when they use this company True Values data and signals, which is huge.
Well,
if you think about
Yeah, in this example, in the doctor example, what I see is a couple themes. One is that there's so much information nowadays, it's beyond 10,000 times beyond impossible to process it all for one person. And then also an AI, instead of just only gathering more information, which could make it even more overwhelming, they could also show you trends and possible interpretations and other things in the data that you wouldn't have the time to see or you couldn't see. So they can give you a much better look at what's going on in any particular sector.
I think that's a very much nicer way to summarize the reasons why we invest in AI, right? Back in 2013, it was all about big data. But I come from the old Yahoo gang back in 2000, where we use, data for managing, frankly, advertising and keywords, right? But a lot of that technology has evolved to where people needed help managing big data. So companies like Splunk came about that went in and helped organize corporate data where you didn't need to go hire tons of data scientists to do it. People still do hire tons of data scientists, but Splunk was really established to help organize big data. Then after that, toward the I think 2015, people started talking about machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing. Why is that? Well, once you organize the data, it's kind of like, what do we do with it? Well, ideally, it can predict, right? Give you predictive or prescriptive even recommendations of what to do, especially around things like medical or enterprise operations. And that's where we are now, whether it be robotics manufacturing or digital health, where people are provided HIPAA and all the, regulatory issues are observed. These companies now help to not only pick up potential signs of illnesses, but also help with, facilitating education of doctors as DocMatter does. And then lastly would be deep learning, where that's the part where some people are really cautious about, the robots taking over a lot of our jobs. But we're not focused there. And I think that's really far away in terms of the areas that we're focused on. Right now, we're really focused on really impacting society positively by helping human beings process all that information that's out there for healthcare, financial services, and even some parts of enterprise operation so that we can be smarter.
Yeah, I would think too that I know it costs millions and a lot of effort to get data, for instance, aggregate financial news or medical data, pharmaceutical data. But then we kind of run into the issue of, well, who has access to it? So if it's locked up and it's only used by one company or, a few different people, well, that's great that they have it, but what about everyone else? And then it can shift the playing field in certain sectors to be, I don't know, unfair or I guess non-competitive for other competitors. So what do you see as the implications of this going forward? What are some of the big issues that everyone's going to struggle with because of the way things are going?
No, I think knowledge traditionally is usually difficult to just lock up because either people want to showcase it, use it, or apply it, right? And in the case of data for DocMatter, although it's a closed community for doctors because of HIPAA-related regulations, I think the doctor network is fairly open. The doctors themselves can invite other doctors, and the invitation acceptance rate is north of 50%. And the usage rate is, within every few days, most of those doctors are logging in. And also the answers that people are getting from this network is on average less than 17 hours. And if you think about a typical doctor's schedule, that's pretty often, and the Q&A average time is pretty quick. So, I think for regulatory reasons, some of this data does need to be behind a closed loop, but it's not like only Johns Hopkins doctors or only UCSF or only, UMass or only US-based doctors can access. This is global, and this is actually currently being used across all the teaching medical universities in the US, plus clinics like Mayo Clinic and others, which is why we like it.
That's
it is
great.
Pretty, I think, fair playground in the sense of, not only the best university teaching hospitals have access, but frankly, doctors who want to be part of the network who are invited can participate.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Well, what kind of insights are you getting, besides what the companies do themselves, besides what the software does itself? You see the inside, and you see not only that, but a lot of pitches. So, what's unique
Yeah.
about your perspective?
Well, I think I don't know that it's my unique perspective, but I think as investors, we do have the privilege of seeing a lot of different models, right? And I think across logistics management, you know, those who have access to a full vertical of how logistics management is managed by AI will get to market and be at a higher quality of performance. And I think that's pretty true across most of the industry segments that's trying to leverage AI. Why? Because AI is ultimately software that has to be applied in real life scenario. And if you have to be dependent on third party partners or whatnot, it just takes longer to implement and test out. So one such case among our portfolio company is Zipline that actually does last mile medical delivery. When they were just a concept in 2014, I invested out of my prior fund, Visionaire, and now continue to invest and support out of Catalyst Ventures. And because they design and develop the drones, the operating system for operating the drone, and the managing platform for managing up to 30 drones eventually, they are able to test and iterate new software as well as hardware changes much quicker than anyone else out there. Is that harder than just creating software for one segment of a data-driven company? Sure. It's like having a couple of startups in one. But I think that's also the reason why they've been able to maintain a lead in creating next generation drones every few years while evolving the software for operation and management platform. Sort of like having an air tower with the flight equipment and the planes all being designed and developed out of one shop or one team.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
And they've been also commercially flying where in the first 16 months they've saved 4,000 lives in Rwanda on an emergency flight basis and have flown 10 or 12,000 commercial flights paid. And they just launched in the U.S. in October this year. So this brings me to, I guess, one other point, which is using AI or technology in particular to fund and support, globally impacting companies that elevate either last mile medical delivery or doctor knowledge, virtual college of sharing, medical knowledge, or ESG fintech company that holds accountable portfolio managers and thus the corporate entities for taking into account more than just financial results can build huge unicorns at the same time, right? And that's one of the underlying thesis that we have with Catalyst Ventures. That's a bit different than Visionaire Ventures. And we have companies in our portfolio that are currently executing on that theme. They themselves, may not necessarily have that mission in mind. But I think we would like to be able to find, discover, and support companies that are solving problems that really help humanity, but at the same time build unicorn companies. Yeah, the two don't have to exist in isolated vacuums, right? And I think we've forgotten sometimes that capitalism doesn't have to mean that you have to just think about the dollars and cents. Greed is maybe good for the 80s theme, but greed for different types of KPIs where you build unicorn companies and also you build companies that help improve lives can be done. And that's really the passion that we have.
Well, how about the founders themselves? What do they tend to think they want when they first come to you? And does that change after you work with them for a while?
Well, I think we find each other. So, for instance, Zipline, it is a mission-driven company. But now they have FedEx, UPS, and others, partnering or wanting to invest. And I think the genesis started with wanting to solve the last mile medical delivery logistics issue in emerging markets where mothers and babies were dying from lack of healthy, clean blood and penicillin, right? But that logistics experience also helped become the basis of this potentially global player in drone-based logistics. And Doc Matter community, they started with both commercial and, I think, elevating world-class doctor knowledge propagation in mind. So the two brothers who started it come from a family that have been on the board of Stanford's fundraising committee for 30 years, and they themselves have been helpful in their family's effort. But the two brothers who come from tech definitely wanted to build a unicorn that can also help propagate doctor knowledge. And the ESG FinTech company, I think it was an idea of the CEO's from when he was in B school, and he and his wife, who's a CTO, built the company. So I don't think these guys go around saying, we're going to build a socially impacting company. I think they go around thinking, we're going to build a AI-driven company that solves this particular problem that really adds value in society.
Or I would guess that a lot of the companies are, I don't know, men are probably more in this space, the coding, computer, AI space. So, as a woman that's essentially a VC in this space, are you alone? Are you unique? Are there a lot of women we just don't know about? And, how is your perspective maybe different from the men that are in the space?
Well, I think I've had a lot of male allies, as you would say, but, who enabled me to raise both Visionary Ventures and Catalyst Fund, right? And ultimately, we need to deliver results, which is returns on investment. So the first fund returned so far from, the companies I've invested. Of the 12 I invested out of Visionaire Fund 1, 3 have exited positively, and 2 are still probably going to be exiting out near billion or over multi-billion unicorn levels. And one of them zipline, the others help shift. And there's a few others that are already, also in that same line. I think with Catalyst is the same. We have, of the 7 investors so far, 5 are in the same high growth mode that I just mentioned, some of which. So ultimately, results matter, male or female, and that's what the fund investors care about. Having said that, I was at a recent All Raise event that was in October, and one data really stuck out, which was of the funds with, more than 25 million assets under management in the U.S., there's only 179 VCs, general partners, who are women. That's about 8% of GPs in the U.S. I thought, wow, I didn't realize that. It's not like I run around thinking about the fact that I'm a female VC, right? Just as much as I never ran around thinking I'm a female, founder, CEO of a tech startup. So that does strike me. But I think all we can do is keep our heads down, work with really awesome teams, and execute and let the numbers do the talking. As a friend of mine who likes to say, he says, let your racket do the talking. He's British, so he likes to do that. But I say, okay, well, that's what we're doing, right?
Yeah, it's funny. We're talking about AI and AI is software, but I don't know. Do you when you look at AI systems, do you get a sense that I don't know? Maybe it's a ridiculous question.
No,
do you get a sense that I don't know. I can't think about this because I'm a male. I have my perspective, but do you get a sense that AI systems have a gender or have a personality or operate in such a way that is alien to you, but seemingly less alien to other people, or vice versa, or it's just software and that's it?
Yeah, I think algorithms are logical, or rather they're logic-based, and it's a lot like a statistical model. So, I remember when I took econometrics long time ago, you basically have it's really the variables that you think matter to map the activities that are recurring. And how much weight each of those variables you give is what's going to determine whether if it's a good model or not. And essentially, that's what an algorithm for AI is. And so I actually had to be a product manager for my own startup's marketing algorithm that predicted, or rather, it was a machine learning model for managing about 256 sources of marketing that auto-flag performances of certain variables, and based on that, would actually give warning or allocate resources to better performing sources among the 256. And that automated the job of several marketers, right? So I think if your question is AI more natural to men? I don't think so. I mean, look at our ESG fintech company. The CTO is a woman, a mother of an 18-month-old. And Flowcast, which is one of the other invested companies at a Visionaire Fund 2, the founding CTO is a woman from MIT and JP Morgan. So of the handful of companies I've invested into, CEOs, CTOs tend to be women. And I think it really depends on how you think versus whether if you're male or female.
Okay. I didn't think there was a difference, but I just wanted to ask, you never know.
It's okay.
Well, in that vein, this is my favorite question to ask people is, because you know what you know when you're an insider on the AI world, what have you seen that's surprising to you or odd or strange or cool or just different?
I think the speed at which the AI application is happening. So, for instance, even in the customer service world, you see a lot of companies saying they're AI. What does that mean? So, if you're familiar with customer service, you have software companies like Sugar CRM or whatnot that are largely ledgers with VAR, automated responses for, FAQs that have been created, right? But now, because of this unstructured data processing ability, you have, I think, CRMs that are becoming more and more 100% automated. So you no longer need a customer support rep who's sitting there and eyeballing new issues coming in and having to hand log those issues and create FAQs manually. All of that can be done now automatically. So the algorithm picks up, this is a new issue. Does this have to do with payment, tech issue? Forgot my, password, but for a different platform. All of that is being picked up automatically. And you would think, well, wasn't that done before? Actually not. You have a lot of AI automated companies that have 40-50% of that automation that are human augmented, which is another way to say you have teams in Philippines, India, somewhere, could be in Arkansas, that's actually sitting there and hand or manually inputting data. So the speed with which this stuff is being automated is really surprising. And finally, I think the humanoids that are actually starting to pop up here and there, that's also surprising, because horizontal AI, where you can ask an AI to do or query anything, people were saying was going to take decades more. But it's starting to happen, at least in the news anchor example of someone in, I think it was like Guangzhou or Guangdong in China, where a humanoid is able to actually process info 24/7. So, and actually report on it, right? So this is all scary. That's the scary trend, I think, for those of us in the info business, which I am too, right? So anyway,
what do you think, over the next 5 years, and we probably won't go out further than that because it's impossible to say, but I mean, what do you think is realistic? What do you think is still fantasy for a while? What do you think is going to happen with the AI world?
Well, if I had the crystal ball to answer all those questions, I think, I myself probably would be AI'd, meaning they would probably replicate my brain through algorithm.
Mm.
The speed at which AI is being implemented is also, there's some regulatory hurdles, and then there's security issues that are coming up here and there, right? Where people are hacking into systems for data. And so it really depends on how available the data is and how often we can test the implementation. So rather than focus on those questions, which is a relevant question, I'm thinking about what are the areas of AI application that are going to be most needed. So one area that I really think about is the retiring boomers around the world and how to facilitate their retirement, both to not only age gracefully in their home if they could, but also the financing of it, right? I read even early this morning on the Wall Street Journal, there used to be 100 insurance companies that offered long-term care. Now there's, I think, only 16 that offer those insurances because the actuaries miscalculated how long each claim recipient would live and the number of assisted living facilities that would be available. So now they're having to either cancel long-term care insurances or increase the premiums on an annual basis on retirees by 50 to 100%. This is like thousands of dollars more per year, which most people can't afford. So I'm thinking, gosh, what if we were to use that ESG fintech technology and actually augment the actuarial process and create a long-term care insurance schema that takes into account the geographic local scenarios, right? Whether it be the weather and the average lifespan of people in, not just San Francisco, but, a local community, as well as the number of assisted living facilities and the price that they're commanding to the types of pharmaceutical products. Yeah.
Or an idea there is, I don't know much about insurance, but I know that they'll do a physical on you, and then I don't know if they ever hear from you again. So perhaps, what would have to happen is an insurance that regularly has you report to it your health and how that changes and what you eat and, your activities and all that, and then it adjusts its coverage or premiums based on your behavior long term,
Yeah, no, and they do that. The only thing with that is people don't like the privacy issue, and if I guess you can do a lot of things around the premium to incentivize that behavior, right? But it's a good idea. I think at the outset,
I'm not saying I would like it, but it may be necessary,
Yeah, I think at the outset when you're pricing this kind of an insurance, how do you update the actuarial data that's out there for the boomers that are retiring now, right? Because they're going to need benefit for the next, starting, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years for another 20 to 30 years. How do you price that, right? And so in the face of gaps in our budget in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and all that, how do you use this data for that solution? So that's something that interests me a lot. And there are specific areas of question that I think about.
Okay, very good. Well, we're close to being out of time. So to wrap up, what's the best way for interested parties to get in touch with you? And then I just wanted to ask you, a final statement that you have, something you want to communicate to listeners.
Sure. I think the best way, especially if they have, globally impacting ideas that they want to discuss, I'm always open. So Susan at catalyst.ventures, Catalyst with a K. And I think the idea is this: you can build world-impacting companies that are also unicorns. And we work with companies like that. Zipline, I think, Doc Matter will be one. I think True Value can be one. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there that are trying to. It's hard enough to be an entrepreneur and founder, but if you can have ideas that can actually help society become better, wouldn't that be even more worthwhile?
Sure, definitely. Yeah. Well, very good. Well, Susan, thanks for coming on the podcast. And I feel like I could talk to you for several more hours, but you're busy and you gotta get looking. Yeah. But thanks for coming.
Thanks a lot, and happy to connect with you anytime, Richard.
You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.